more on if climate change could be the cause of the floods in KwaZulu-Natal. We're joined by Stellenbosch Climate Change Expert, Professor Guy Midgley. Professor, very good evening. Thanks so much for speaking to us. There seems to be much conjecture on the cause of the floods that we're experiencing in KZN. South African Weather Service attributing it to tropical cyclones. What is your take?
Well, it seems actually to be associated with quite an unusual weather event called a cut-off low, which sometimes occurs over the country. And these systems sort of wander away from the south and can dump very, very large amounts of rainfall in very short periods of time. This one appears to have hung around the east coast and got fueled to some extent by very moisture-rich air coming off the Indian Ocean, which really added to the extremeness of that rainfall event. So is it consistent with climate change? Absolutely, yes. We are seeing these sorts of trends occurring throughout South Africa and all around the world. So the question, is it consistent with anthropogenic climate change, human-caused climate change? The answer to that question is yes.
So there have been two previous floods that we can report in the recent past in KwaZulu-Natal, 2017, 2019, and obviously now in 2022 where we get in these floods and 300 millimeters of rainfall. Now, this particular event is more rainfall than experienced in those two previous episodes. What do we read from that?
Well, we read a story of increasing moisture in the atmosphere, warmer surface temperatures of the ocean, which leads to greater evaporation. And what goes up has to come down. So more extreme rainfall events, more intense rainfall events. And as I say, we've got there are a number of papers that have been published showing these trends have been increasing over several decades. That signal is very, very clear.
Now, one of those things that happens, obviously, is that there's statistics and reports over time that are followed to establish if this is what is actually happening. And as far as climate change is concerned, do we have the stats to back up climate change as a cause of all this rainfall?
There's been a very recent study, I'm not sure if it's out yet, but has been reported in the media, showing what's called attribution, which is the proof, statistical proof, that a portion of these events is due to climate change for an area slightly north of our latitude, so into Madagascar and Mozambique. And there the scientists reckon that the stats show that this is in fact provable, it's attributable. But we have several studies over South Africa that is starting to lead to very significant statistical inferences that this is in fact an anthropogenic, a human-caused signal in the rainfall events, definitely.
Well, typically when you look outside and you see the clouds building up, it kind of gives you an idea that there's potential rainfall. What are some of the indicators that we've been seeing over the last few months or last few years that suggest that climate change is taking place outside of this particular event? Because it seems that a lot of experts are jumping onto the bandwagon because of this one event and attributing it to climate change, and there have been almost no conversations of this nature preceding this event.
Well, we had the opposite kind of event in Cape Town a few years ago with the Cape Town drought, which is another kind of climate phenomenon which is worsened by human-caused climate change. We've seen flooding in other parts of the country and droughts in other parts of the country. We're now coping with outbreaks of locust swarms over parts of the Karoo, which have had 2 years in a row of above-average rainfall. So, the climate, as we add more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, we increase the energy in the atmosphere, and we juice up the climate. It becomes less predictable, and this is, these are the sorts of things that can happen. And in a country like ours, where we have human settlements people crowding in around cities to look for work and to look for a better life, and maybe settling in areas that are disaster prone, that collides with these sorts of trends. And this is really something that we've got to get on top of, because this is not something that's going to go away.
Professor, I'm going to have to go back to this issue of climate change and what we're attributing it to. Is that when you talk about floods, you talk about droughts, and you talk about swarms of locusts, stuff that I'm all too familiar with growing up many years ago. And all of a sudden, then the issues were not climate change. It is now climate change. Has the realization that it's climate change only just dawned upon us, or is this a manifestation of climate change over the last 20 or 30 years?
That's a very good perceptive question. The statistics tell us that climate is a phenomenon made up of many weather events, and so it's very difficult to say a particular weather event proves that we have climate change. One has to look at the statistics over decades to be able to detect these trends and attribute them. And we're now at the point where this is happening. There have been some really extreme events in the Northern Hemisphere which are almost undoubtedly attributable to anthropogenic climate change. One of the reasons is that they've been collecting data at those latitudes for more than a century. So they've got the length of the records to be able to use the statistics. We don't have quite that length of record, particularly north of our border. But we do have enough to be able to say something quite defensible. So you've got to be careful, because one's own experience clouds one's perception of what happened in the past. And really, one does need to go back and look at the statistics and look at how nature's responding, for example, and look at how sea surface temperatures are responding. We have to trust our scientific instruments as well as the instruments in our heads, our eyes and our ears.
Now, Professor Midgley, away from the proponents of climate change, to those that have said that the cause of all this flooding is because of poor drainage system and infrastructure that has not been maintained in the KwaZulu-Natal area. Your thoughts there?
I'm not aware of the situation on the ground there, but as I said, if you combine climate change multiplies risks, and if one is not maintaining drainage systems, you get a collision between these extreme events and these poor practices. So a part of adaptation to climate change is making sure that we invest enough resources in building roads that are resilient to climate change, making sure people are settled in areas that are less prone to risk, building better buildings. I mean, we've lost a lot of medical facilities in KwaZulu-Natal, some schools. And the investment has to be made in infrastructure that is resilient, and it has to be maintained. The margin for error under climate change worlds is very narrow, and countries that fail to adapt will fail. Countries that succeed in their adaptation will be much more likely to succeed. This is a very real problem that we face.
Professor Midgley, before we let you retire for the night, now that assuming we are in agreement that climate change is a cause of a flooding in KwaZulu-Natal, let's take a look at that blueprint that you have in front of you on what government needs to do, the government of South Africa, to deal with climate change issues in the foreseeable future. What does it look like?
Well, I think government has, a good program laid out. Government understands the need for adaptation very well. We have a number of studies and plans in place around building adaptive capacity in the country. We also need to be looking at the mitigation pathway of South Africa and trying to build a just transition towards a new energy future which creates jobs, better lives for people. But at the same time, we need to keep an eye on, a very strong eye on adaptation. And we need to protect our water resources, human settlements, our food security and agriculture, human health. There are a wide range of things that we've got to do. And at the same time, we have to develop sustainably. It's a tall order, but government has many plans in place. and of course the Presidential Climate Change Commission, which is doing some very sterling work, very transparent and consultative work, understanding climate change and reporting back to the highest levels. So there are many things in place.
Professor Guy Midgley, climate change expert from Stellenbosch, speaking to us there and unpacking the issues around the impact of climate change on those dreadful floods that we are witnessing in KwaZulu-Natal. Thank you for your time this evening.